Hi, it's Mark from Top Local. I'm here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver, Vancouver's best auto service experience, 24-time winners, best auto repair in Vancouver is voted by their customers. And we're talking about a Toyota Highlander. There can only be one. How you doing, Bernie?
Good. I'm good.
So this is a 2016 hybrid. What was going on with this Toyota?
The owner had some concerns with the brakes. They were making some noises and didn't quite feel right. So he brought it in for us to have a look at the brakes.
So what kind of inspections do you do to check what's going on with the brakes?
We have a standard brake inspection that we do for anyone who needs the brakes looked at. And so that entails, of course, a road test as the first thing to see if there's any noises, see how the brakes feel. Of course, if the pedal's going straight to the floor and there are no brakes, we don't go on a road test, but that's not very common, fortunately, because then the road test happens after we do the hoist inspection. So we go on a road test, then do a hoist inspection. We remove all the wheels, look at the brakes in detail, measure the thickness of the brake pads, the rotors, test to make sure things are moving, look for leaks, inspect the brake fluid, look at the hoses, lines, and all those kind of things. And it depends from vehicle to vehicle. I mean, on an old car that's perhaps from, more salt prone areas, we'll look at a little more detail at the brake lines than we would on, say, like a 2016 Highlander that's, lived in British Columbia, like Vancouver area all its life. It's only 5 years old.
What kind of stuff did you find?
Yeah, so on the road test, we noted there's some grinding sounds. The brakes felt like they're shaking a bit, possibly warped rotors. We found on the front brakes, one side the brake pads were worn down to 2 millimeters, which is basically worn out. The other side, they were 7 millimeters, which is an enormous difference. I mean, 7 millimeters is, still has 60% of the brake pad life left. 2 millimeters is basically worn out. On the rears, they were down to about the 4 to 5 range, so almost worn out. But the rotors were also pretty rusty. I mean, the brakes looked like they'd probably been on here for a long time. Let's get in some pictures here. We can have a look at what we found. So there's the Highlander hybrid, the vehicle. As far as the brakes, let's have a look at some of the old brakes. This is the front brake. Not really looking too much in the pads, but you can see the edges of the rotors are starting to rust, which is kind of normal wear and tear after a while. It indicates these brakes have been on the car for a long time, unless, of course, you're in somewhere climates like rustier, then they get worse. And again, you can see here the edges of the rotors are very rusted, which indicates they've been on a long time. Not severely rusted, though. If certain areas of the country, and we even see it here, sometimes the actual surface will start getting badly rusted. And, that's definitely not a good thing, but, easily replaced. So just looking at what we repaired, new calipers, rotors, pads on the front. You can see everything's nice and clean and fresh surfaces. We lubricate everything with the special brake lubricant, which keeps squeaks and squeals to a minimum and just keeps everything moving to maximize the life. And the rear brakes did pads and rotors. Caliper was okay, so we left that. So I'm kind of jumping ahead to the repairs we did, but we can talk about that some more in detail. So there's our picture show.
So you replaced everything basically in the brakes.
We did, yeah. So what causes the brakes to be 7 millimeters on one side and 2 on the other? There's basically a seized caliper. 99% of the time, you can get a brake hose where sometimes a brake hose will develop a blockage and it'll restrict the flow to one direction. So that can happen. But on a 2016, basically a 5-year-old vehicle, you'd never find that. It's only something that would happen on a maybe 10 or 20-year-old vehicle, but never on something that's 5 years old. It would be very unusual. So basically the caliper was seized on one side, causing the brakes to wear out much quicker. And on the rears, I mentioned there's like 4 to 5 millimeters. I mean, 1 or 2 millimeter difference is no big deal. We test the calipers when we do the inspection and make sure that everything's moving freely. So the rear brake calipers were serviceable and all good.
So why would that caliper phrase on and cause that one brake basically to do most of the work?
Well, a couple of things. You can get corrosion, like moisture that intrudes inside the caliper piston, and that causes it to rust and then seize up. Also, the calipers have a sliding portion, and they usually have pins that allow the caliper to slide back and forth. Some brake calipers have pistons on the outside and inside, and they don't have any slider pins. So any sticking in that area would either be a pad stuck where the pads slide, call them pad sliders, the pad sliding area. But there's a few things. The pins can seize up as well. On this type of caliper, it has an inner piston and pins that allow it to slide. So those seize up as well. And, they can be serviced and cleaned. That's a little easier to fix. But once they get really severe, it's better just to change the whole caliper.
So hybrid vehicles, because of the recharge, I guess depends on the kind of hybrid, whether it's recharging or not, or do they all recharge?
Most of them, yeah, regenerative braking. I mean, Toyotas certainly do.
So that brake, because of the regeneration, the brakes aren't being used as much. Shouldn't these brakes last a lot longer than this?
Well, you'd think so. I mean, 5 years is not that old, but this vehicle does have 145,000 kilometers. So that's actually a fair bit of mileage. So I assume looking at these brakes that they were original. And that kind of makes sense for a hybrid. 145 Ks is pretty good, but you could still get 200. I mean, that's why taxis, they love Priuses because they're reliable and the brakes last a long time. Like a typical taxi, they'd only get 3 months out of a set of brakes on a conventional vehicle. 3 months on, most people complain when they have to do their brakes every 3 or 4 years, but on a taxi, it's like every 3 months. But that takes a car off the road for a few hours. So, I mean, with a Prius, they can get a year out of a set of brakes. So it's an enormous change. So yeah, I mean, I'd say 145 Ks is a pretty good amount of time. And had this caliper not seized, these brakes probably would have lasted substantially longer.
Right. Is there anything that a Highlander or any vehicle owner can do to maximize their brake life?
Yeah, absolutely. Having the brakes serviced every couple of years on a vehicle like this is really critical, especially on a hybrid, because again, the brake pads last a long time. You can do a brake inspection after a year or two and go, oh, well, there's still 10 millimeters left on the front brake pads. A couple of years later, you look and there's like 9 and, they're barely wearing, but it's a good idea to take them apart, clean them, lubricate them with that type of lube we use, take the pad slider pins out, clean and lubricate everything. That keeps the brakes lasting a lot longer. And if you did that kind of service, you'd probably easily get 200,000 or at least 100 and probably another 50,000 out of a vehicle like this. Of course, the edge rust on those rotors, you can't really do a lot about that. I mean, you could machine them, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do that. You're kind of taking material off the brakes and, as long as they're not grinding and making weird noises, I would probably just service them every year or two and you should be fine.
Yeah. So how are Toyota Highlander hybrids for reliability?
They're legendary. Yeah, no, they're awesome. I think their older Highlanders did have some issues with inverters. I mean, this is a 2016. It's much newer than, I'm thinking like 08s and 7s, like older. This is a newer generation. I mean, as far as I know, there's no problems with them. 145 Ks out of a set of brakes is pretty good. It's a good vehicle. I can't find any fault with it. Excellent.
So if you're looking for service for your hybrid or your EV or your Toyota or your Highlander in Vancouver, the guys to call, Pawlik Automotive. You can reach them at 604-327-7112 to book your appointment. You have to call and book ahead. They're busy. Check out the website. You can book online there. They'll get back to you. They'll find out exactly what's going on. Be ready for you when you show up. PawlikAutomotive.com. Of course, there's our YouTube channel, hundreds of videos on there, all makes and models and types of repairs. We've got 9 years worth of videos on there. Pawlik Auto Repair. You can search for that there. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. Bernie, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for watching.